Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Peering Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Richardson, and we've got two great guests today, Mark Neilson and Bill McDonough. Hey, Mark and Bill, how are you doing?
Doing great, Mike. Doing
Good.
Great. How are you?
Great to have you here. Thanks both for taking the time. And as you know, everybody, in the Peering Podcast here, we peer into the power of peer advisory boards and where the category is going next. To tap into agility powered by collective intelligence, we explore the why, what, who, how, where, and when of peer advisory boards by having guests of all kinds and having a kind of fireside chat with live listeners able to join in the conversation. And as I mentioned, we are blessed to have Bill and Mark with us today to discuss our topic today, which is all about a particular kind of peer advisory board that we call a financial executive forum. REF's Financial Executive Forum, a forum specifically for financial executives of different kinds, CFOs, finance executives, VPs, directors, treasury, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll hear more about all of that as we go forward here. But to get us rocking and rolling, maybe we'll start with you, Mark, and then we'll come to you, Bill. Tell us a little bit about your career track as a financial executive yourself, Mark, and how did you begin to realize the need for a forum experience of financial executives?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I started off as many financial executives did. I was a CPA in public accounting. That's a fairly common path and kind of lets you kind of learn the technical aspects of accounting and finance. And then nice part is there's a little bit of window shopping because you work with clients. And one of those clients hired me over as their CFO after a handful of years in public accounting. And, I started off doing typical, controller CFO stuff. And then a couple of years in, one of the co-founders of this company, who was a sales executive, pulls me aside and explained to me that I was more of a bean counter than a business person. That was my first wake-up call, that there was a lot more to it than just being the guy in the scoreboard, spitting out reports and numbers. And so it was really, shook me up, but for the better. And so over the years, I realized there was a whole lot more to this CFO stuff than just, compliance, reports, and history.
Yep.
And so that's what inspired me. And then later in life, when I had a different career, I had more full responsibility, and I was in a peer group with CEOs.
Yep.
And so I had many years of that, and that's what inspired me to realize that, there's a big gap out there because financial people have a very complicated and lonely life. And perhaps they would enjoy this kind of experience that I was participating in with fellow CEOs.
Yeah, and in full interest of full disclosure, everybody, we can mention names, Mark, because we have in previous episodes of this podcast. Everybody, I was a chair with that other peer group organization that starts with a V, Vistage. And lo and behold, back, I think around 2006, 2007, Mark became a member of my one of my CEO peer groups. Did I get the timing about right, Mark?
Yes.
Yeah. And Mark was in that group for probably, until 2018, right? And so for 10, 12 years, and probably somewhere sort of halfway through that, came to me one day and said, Mike, would you be open to pivoting one of your other kinds of groups for executives, key executives? Would you be open to pivoting one of those key groups to be specifically for CFOs and other kinds of financial executives? And so we did. And Mark and I teamed on running that peer group, which we did for probably, I think, Mark, 5 or 6 years, something like that. And it just turned into an incredibly valuable experience for all concerned. And that really was one of the impetus elements of why we're now doing this at scale here in REF. Did I get all that right, Mark? Anything else you want to add on the fire there?
No, but in teeing up Bill, that about that same time, because Bill and I were partners in a different business back in the Midwest, and I asked Bill if he would like to consider doing the same thing. So I introduced him
Awesome.
to the REF folks in Northern Indiana. So that leads us to Bill.
Yeah, Bill. So equally an early adopter of this financial executive forum concept. How did you arrive at that inspiration, Bill? Tell us about your career track.
Well, maybe backing up a few years from when Mark and I first talked about this. Like Mark, I have an undergrad degree in accounting. I went right into industry instead of the public accounting route. And,
Right.
I did any number of different accounting type functions over the first few years of my career. But a few years in, I had the ability to move more into the corporate finance world. And it was a little bit more about interesting. I thought I was going to be a CPA accountant forever. And this opened up a whole nother world for me of not just recording history, but also trying to make history a little bit, really having more of an impact on the company's financial results.
Wow, I really like that. That's really cool. Not just recording.
That's what sold
making
me on
history.
it. I still remember that conversation.
That's a great concept.
So I progressed up through a number of different roles up to the treasurer and ultimately CFO function in a company. But eventually we sold the company. And when you do that, sometimes you sell yourself out of a job. And so at that point, I made the decision to kind of switch gears and see if I couldn't help small and medium-sized companies with all this knowledge that I had learned over the years. And so I started doing CFO consulting and other kinds of consulting work with these small to medium-sized companies, which eventually led me to Mark and to Tony Huddy, my partner still today, who was instrumental in starting REF in Northern Indiana. And so my vision of working with CFOs and accountants, controllers, et cetera, in small businesses was they really didn't have a peer group at all.
Right.
And they needed that. And at the same time, Mark and Tony were talking to me about the fact that many CEOs, business owners, presidents, et cetera, were saying the same thing. They're saying, my financial person, my financial executive, they need a peer group. And that was really the genesis for us starting that in about 2013, I think, Mark. In Northern Indiana, we started our first
beautiful.
We were calling it CFO group at the time.
And I love
it's gone from there.
And I love what you just said. Kind of, my CFO needs a peer group, if I may, not putting words in your mouth, but because they need to be a better co-pilot for me, the CEO, in a more rounded, deeper, more strategic way. Would you resonate with that, Bill?
Absolutely. It was really not much to do about accounting. It was more to do about developing them into these better leaders, better parts of the team. That really help companies grow. Right.
So as you just heard, everybody, Bill is in Northern Indiana and Mark is in Southern California. Tell us more, Mark, about where you are, and then perhaps pick up on the co-pilot theme, Mark, and weigh in on that.
Well, so I moved here from Northern Indiana. That's how I knew Bill already, and we had another business that we were involved in together. So I got involved. I left being a member of the group that you chaired with Visage, and then was so into the peer group experience that I wanted to be a part owner of one. And so I bought into the San Diego franchise and have been involved for about 2 or 3 years now. And the fact of the co-pilot thing, I mentioned earlier that I had a little bit of a wake-up call early in my career that I was, up in the press box and needed to be down on the field, And so I part of what we're doing in these peer groups is trying to get people. I don't know that we're making them any smarter. They're already smart. And that's not our goal. Our goal is to help change their perspective about their roles in the company and to look at the company from the outside in. It's true they have to manage up, oftentimes with the CEO or other colleagues who may not have much financial background or perspective. And obviously they got to manage their department, whether it's finance or accounting or whatever. But to truly be a co-pilot means to be able to look out the same window as the pilot, to see what's coming, not just tell them what's going on in the back room, the historical stuff that Bill talked about. So it's not just about forecasting, it's about thinking differently. And, I kind of say it goes from being a fixed mindset. Accounting and financial people, which we are, grow up in a rules-based mindset. And that's one bookend is the rules and the barriers, stay in these lines. But there's a growth mindset that's on the other bookend, which is how do I start asking about what if, or whether it be what if something bad happens or what if something good happens. So that shift in mindset is really what this is about, because that's what a co-pilot needs. I mean, to use your word, Mike, agility, and most financial people are not inherently equipped with that. So that's part of what we're developing.
Yeah, I really love that. And Bill, I'll ask you to weigh in a moment. I think this contrast between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, which you could apply to any kind of our ref forums, whether it's for CEOs or diverse key executives, or in this case, what we call a vertical key group for a specific kind of executive, in this case, financial executives. This contrast between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, which, in simple terms is a fixed mindset is I'm more focused on what I know. I'm more focused on how smart I am. I'm more focused on the beliefs I have about how the world works, versus a growth mindset, which is I'm more focused on what I don't know. I'm more focused on how smart everybody else is, not me. And I'm more focused on changing my beliefs, and I'm curious. We'll come back to curiosity in a minute, Mark, because I know that's a key word for you. I'm curious about how other people see the world, what other beliefs people have that are different from my own, because that's sort of where the gold is. It's in them, their hills. Bill, do you want to weigh in all of that?
It really is in them, their hills, Mike, because those are the kind of members we really want to attract.
Yeah.
Right. Those members that have that, we call it a couple things, right? One thing we call it is a human sponge, that ability to really want to keep learning all the time. The other one that we really focus on is this passion for helping. And that's helping the other people in the group. And that's the letting yourself be helped.
Yeah.
Right? Letting yourself be helped too. And when you get a group like that really going with that collective intelligence that's in the room, that's like what Mark and I like to say, that's when the magic happens in these groups.
Yeah. And
it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Me thinking back to when I was a CFO I was in a big company. And when you're in a big company, people don't think you need to be in a peer group because you have a peer group. Well, I really would challenge that too, because something like this would have really benefited me many years ago.
I love that, Bill. I love you just took us there, because that is indeed a question that I wanted to ask you both is, with hindsight now, looking back at your career, do you have any sense of regret that you didn't get to experience the benefits of a peer forum, earlier in your career? You just made me laugh, Bill, because when I was a CEO, everybody, I ran the aerospace division of a British company, initially from the UK and then from the USA. If I had gone to my corporate boss and I had said that I wanted to be part of a peer group to get peer input and to get coaching input, he would have looked at me rather strange and said, "I'll give you all the input you need."
You don't need, you don't need to go out of the company to get that. We got plenty of people right here in this room that'll tell you, they'll tell you how it is.
So
I mean, for me, I think I missed out on that piece of it. I really did.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I didn't know about peer groups, and so I think I didn't learn what I could have learned.
Yeah.
If I could add something,
kind of siloed right there. You're siloed into that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I pick up on that one?
Yeah, please do.
So, Bill, we had a member, a guest at our last meeting in December, and like most of these folks that come to kick the tires of being in a peer group for the first time, he had no idea what he was getting into, and he thought, we'll talk about some technical stuff, which we rarely do. And one of the topics, the roundtable topics, was about how each of the members is dealing with the stress, the burnout, the health, and life balance challenges that come with the role. And so we each went around, we talked about it, and when I called him the next day, he said, "I'm joining." And I said, "Is there anything that triggered that?" He said, "Yeah, that conversation about the life part of it, that we are people dealing with a type A job and we are type A people." So he appreciated that, that we were not just there doing technical stuff. And so it kind of picks up on what he didn't know. He didn't know what he was getting into. So.
Yeah, and I love that as well. And it sort of dovetails back to what you said earlier, Bill, about being a human sponge. You didn't say being a technical sponge. You didn't say being a functional expert sponge. You said being a human sponge, being a human first. We're all humans first, everybody, trying to figure stuff out. We're trying to figure out this leadership thing, this management thing, this strategy thing, this execution thing, and not least of all this life thing of how do we, retain some semblance of balance and happiness and living a somewhat harmonious life as best we can. That is important human stuff that if we're not careful, we just don't have anywhere else we can go to get input on that. Bill, what would you add to
I would just say to that is really what we focus on. We, like Mark, we rarely get into technical discussions. Sometimes when we do, we almost laugh about it. And we have some experts in the room on certain things like revenue recognition or whatever the case may be. But typically it's about leadership, but it's also about me, the person too.
Yeah.
Mark, in December, we had a number of groups that talked about that exact topic.
Yeah.
Because it's been a crazy couple years, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
What's happening. And so I think when you bring a guest to a meeting, they really get a different and better perspective of what it really means to be in this peer group. And
even the term peer group can be confusing because they think it's some kind of networking thing,
right? Because
that's all they've ever been to is networking things where service providers are trying to slide their business cards into their pocket and have coffee with them. But that's not what this is. So I think it's a big surprise and a very, very good way to those who've never been in a peer group before.
Yeah, everybody, as you heard, Mark was in one of my groups. I ran 4 groups. I had 2 CEO groups and 2 key groups. I did that, one of which was for CFOs. I did that for 15 years. So, do the math, how many meetings that was. And probably, every meeting or every other meeting in one of those groups, we would have a brand new member who'd had their first experience of the peer group. And in some way, shape or form, at the end of the day, when we turn to them and say, "So how was it for you?" In their own words, they would say something like, "I never knew that something like this existed. I assumed this was more networking, more training, more consulting, more coaching. I didn't realize how different and deeply powerful this was." I feel like I've known you all for some time already because we're soulmates. We're going through the same stuff. And I think, Mark, it's fair to say that when we have new members in the financial executive forum in particular, they were right there too. I never knew anything like this existed, and maybe even more so because I think what I'm hearing from both of you is that financial executives in particular are even more starved for this kind of opportunity and possibility and experience. Would you weigh in on that, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the CPA firms try to create this. It kind of descends into more technical stuff where they get to, maybe have a beer together and listen to a technical speaker. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's a different experience than really letting your guard down. And most of our members have already become good friends with each other outside. Mike, when you're a former facilitator, nothing is more heartwarming than when people show up for the meeting and they're all, talking about stuff they've done together outside the meeting.
Yeah, in between, since the last time we saw them, I visited your place, you came to my place. Thanks for that support. Back to Bill's point, Mark's point, that you're not there primarily to get technical stuff, but clearly technical stuff comes up. Hey, anybody know an expert on this or an expert on that or a resource on this, or I need to change my banking relationship, or I need, I'm looking for a new piece of software. Of course, all of that happens as a sort of, bedrock of the experience. But that isn't where the magic happens, as Bill was saying. The magic happens, Bill, weigh in on this, when really, in my experience, when a member comes to the group and kind of says to everybody, I've got a challenge and I just don't know what to do. Bill, weigh in on that?
That's where the magic is, Mike. Not that we don't cover all those other things that you just said, but it's really about that group coming together to help a member, right? To help one of their own. They really feel like that after a while. You're helping one of your own with whatever that challenge is. It can be a business challenge. It can also be a personal challenge. And we've covered a lot of personal challenges over the years too.
Yeah. So
And,
it could be
go ahead.
It could be a business challenge around something technical with the financial equation, or it could be, my relationship with my CEO is a bit strained and I'm not sure what to do, or perhaps the board that has some private equity people on it and we just don't seem to be jiving well. It could be something to do with their team. It could be something to do with their peers. There's just a lot of tension between me, the CFO, and the sales VP. Yeah. We're butting heads all the time. Or it could be my teenage son is on drugs and I just don't know what to do. Absolutely.
We've covered all those things, including that last one.
Exactly.
And it is very powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is. And it's really the power of the group coming together.
Yeah.
To help.
If I can just add, Mike, to all of that, this is true for most financial people. I know it was true for me that all over many years until I was about 50, I thought, that whatever business you were in, whether it was a service or a product, that was your business. Well, turns out that every business is in the people business. And when you come up a technical path, as lawyers, accountants, and others do, then you get kind of wired that way. But when you realize that everything you're doing is in the people business, and that includes yourself and your family, not just your CEO and those around you, that you're
so well said.
And that's a hard thing, but I think it's also a comforting thing when everybody around the table realizes the same thing, that they've got to balance the technical from the human.
Yeah. And while we call these financial executive forums, we actually would major on the word executive first. You're an executive first, and you're a financial expert second. And by the way, you're not just an executive in business, you're an executive in life. You're an executive with your career and professionally and in balance and all of those kinds of things. And so it's really about leadership and self-awareness and emotional intelligence and all of those things, Bill. Such a rich experience. And everybody listening, Mark and Bill have been doing financial executive forums in one way, shape, or form for more than 10 years or approaching 10 years. So this is a very rich experience base with tens, if not hundreds, of different financial executive forum members over those periods of time. Bill, it's a very rich experience. Not my guess is not least of all for you, Bill, as the facilitator of these experiences.
That's something I talk about a lot, Mike, is that a meeting, as powerful as it is for the members, as the leader, and you have a great meeting, I call it a high. I do, because when you can help those people get to where they need to get to, it is super powerful. I love it. I do a lot more than that now in Northern Indiana, but I could just be a forum leader. Because that's really where it is. It's helping these individually and collectively, these groups get to where they want to be professionally and personally.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And so, listeners, if you're curious, then let's come back to that word, Mark, of curiosity, because that's been a word that you've really adopted and sort of disassembled. So tell us more about, and you even talk about CFOs being the curiosity financial officer. Tell us more about that, Mark.
Well, it probably does go back to what I mentioned earlier when I came out of public accounting as an auditor, frankly, on one side of the extreme, very left brain. And, curiosity is not something that I think that almost gets kind of programmed out of us early in our career because we're not allowed to be curious. We're supposed to just stay in the lines, make sure, we do things right and that it complies. And, sometimes you end up feeling like you're the police, in a company. And, there's a little bit of that comes with the territory. But what's way more valuable, and it allows a person to advance in their career and frankly have more fun in the job, is when you start asking, I wonder if, you can fill that in with anything, but I wonder if, we had a location in this territory instead of that territory, or in addition to, whether that would be a great thing. Oh, maybe I should model that out. Or I wonder if we have any products, services, or customers that are detracting from our profitability, and 100 other curious questions. But unless you get your hands and mind out of the blocking and tackling of just keeping score and doing reports, you don't make time. And oftentimes in these peer groups, it frees up their mind for a half a day to start thinking about those things and work on the business. You always hear that term, working on versus in. Well, these half-day meetings that we have once a month are often the only time that our financial executive peer group members get to think about the on.
And come into a different space in which they can breathe different air and regain their perspective and their balance. And I'm sure one of the curiosity questions is, I wonder if there's a different way of me looking at this challenge I've got, and what better place to come to than a peer group of peers from different industries, no conflict of interest in the room, right? Different industries, different kind of businesses. And so I might be running, a CFO of a software company, and over there I've got a manufacturing company, and over there I've got a service company, and this is a local company, and that's a global company. And by the time I'm done, they've really unzipped the way I've been looking at something, and I'm now able to look at it sort of much more 360 degrees in the round and see some other angles on which I can get some leverage on it and start to move forward. What would you add into the mix, Bill, of this whole theme of curiosity?
I think one thing that comes to mind right away is, because let's face it, in our world, these financial execs are still very busy people. They're doing a lot of things. They're managing their teams as well as kind of managing up. And so they're head down. They're working hard. And they've all got their issues and their problems. And this once a month meeting also, I think, gives them a little bit of comfort sometimes that they're not the only one out there with all these issues. And that can really make them feel better.
Hey, Bill, maybe you might talk about just briefly what Mike alluded to, which was, when one or more members brings an issue, is that how you attack that and unbundle it for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have a process, obviously. People in our groups, people inherently want to help each other, right? And so when a member comes with an issue, immediately they'll all want to jump in and help. But we try and facilitate that process a little bit by first clarifying the issue, right? And so we may do a couple what we call rounds of clarifying questions to get to really the heart of the issue and what the member is looking for in terms of advice. And once we've kind of nailed that down, we allow each member to give advice, not tell them what they would do, but to say, you know, Mike, if I was you, this is what I might want to do. And it comes from their experience and it comes from their heart. And we capture those. And we give the member some time to think about that. And then we kind of guide them to, well, what are you going to do? What do you think you're going to do about this? And please come back next month and report on that to us.
And you know what the best part of that for me, Bill, is that sure, it may seem like one person is benefiting from that, 45-minute process. But yeah. I think the best part of that is that all the other members, some of whom may have the same issue or had it, is they're learning to ask questions. And because I say that the biggest shift in my career, and I'm on a bunch of corporate boards, which is a blessing, but I realize I'm on those boards not because I have the answers, but because I've learned, and partially through the peer group I was in with Mike and groups I continue to be a member of, is learning to ask good questions instead of being the answer man.
Exactly. And the idea that questions beat answers, right? Because there are multiple answers to a question. The one you've chosen probably aligns with your personal belief system, but by the time you've got a 360-degree rounded perspective, you realize, oh, I've got a tunnel vision on this, which I need to open up. And it really plays back, Mark, to fixed mindset versus growth mindset, right? Fixed mindset people are more focused on answers. Growth mindset people are more focused on questions and let the answers surface and reveal themselves.
Mark, I would say the other thing that I really get out of each one of those discussions is there's always some advice that comes up that you would never think of.
Yeah. How many times have we heard that?
Absolutely. Every time.
Yeah.
We typically, as facilitators, we're not weighing in on that discussion. But I'm thinking in my mind, wow, I would have never thought of that. But exactly. That is really great advice. And so that's the power of this collective intelligence. It really is.
Yeah. How many times, Mark, in our 10 years together in that one group, I had 4 groups in total, did we hear exactly that? Wow. Wow, what a great idea that is. Or even more so, wow, what a great question that is. Man, you know what? I'm not sure I've ever asked myself that question before. I need to take that away and really think about that, because I got to do some work in answering that question. I don't know what my answer is right now. Thank you. And you'll hear members say, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hey, so, Mike, the other thing, just real quick, the other thing is a lot of times the member will come with an issue, but it's not the real issue.
Exactly.
I mean, the real issue, the issue they bring is kind of the on the surface issue.
Yeah.
But with some questions, as Mark was saying, you kind of ultimately get to, there's a real issue here, and it's a much deeper issue.
Exactly.
And let's tackle that issue.
Yeah. And often everybody, the real issue is behind the issue, beneath the issue, beside the issue. It's inside the issue. It has to be unpacked. And sometimes it's very well camouflaged because the member is possibly unconsciously, somewhat unknowingly, fearful of bringing the real issue. And then we'll often say to people, hey, don't hide the ball. Just tell us where the ball is. You're amongst friends here. The door is closed. This is totally confidential. Everybody's hung the armor and the thick skin and the ego at the door. let's just come on in and be fully you. Put it on the table so we can work on it together. And then often everybody, when they ultimately do, 2 or 3 other people will raise their hand around the table and say, you are not alone. I have that same issue. And you can just see the fear and the stress melt away, can't you, Bill? Because people realize, oh, it's not just me.
Right. And that's when you really see these groups get bonded.
Yeah.
It's
well, look, we'll start to land this plane. Before we do so, I want to ask you both one more question and just sort of get your sort of top of mind answer to this. For financial executive forums, in your experience, your many years of doing this, and as recently perhaps as your last meeting or last month or last year, whatever, why is it, do you think, that financial executives join these forums? And possibly more importantly, why do they stay? Bill, do you want to take a crack at that? Why do they join and why do they stay?
Sure. I think they join because, as we've been discussing, there's not this kind of outlet for them. When you think of CEOs, business owners, there's a lot of different outlets that they get into, but financial execs are head down, working hard, and they're like, wow, I never knew there was something like this, even though they don't know what it is.
Yep.
Exactly. But then they get into it and they see the process that we have and what the meetings are about. And they stay because they get the help they're looking for. They get the ability to help other people, right? And they build this stronger network, both professionally and personally.
Yeah,
so.
Beautiful. And over time, develop a more quiet inner confidence about their future.
Yes.
Because they've got this support system that can cope with anything, right? It's like, hey, whatever comes at you, bring it here, because we can help you gobble it up and deal with it and move forward. Mark, great input, Bill. Love it. Love your language. Love some of the metaphors and phrases that you brought to the conversation today. Thank you so much for being here. Mark, what would you add into the mix?
Well, I think the members join. They come just because they're curious, but they join because they are shocked to find out it's not just another networking thing, and that everybody's real in the room. And then they also look around and they see all these smart people, some of them from companies larger than their own, and go, wow, if she's in the room or if he's in the room, there must be something here.
Yeah. And
so they discover what that is in their very first meeting. And we usually engage them in that meeting and get them to open up and maybe even, process a case or an issue that they have, just so they can feel it themselves and not just be a spectator. But I think they stay because there's these 4 hours, which is only about 2 or 3% of the total working hours they'll have in a month. It's I think you said it earlier, Mike, they're breathing different air. Even though they know the emails and the work is continuing to pile up back there during those 4 or 5 hours, they get to think about things differently and get to breathe and relax. They're around people. They totally do let their guards down. And that's not something they get anywhere else. Yes. And in financial world, and I'm in all kinds of financial networking things, I don't know of other truly peer group experiences like this. I mean, the one that you had at Vistage was the only one in the system because it just wasn't in their DNA to do that. So that's why we're doing it.
And I do have to repeat this famous story that I've told a few times. So Mark indeed comes to his first meeting of the CEO group, and he's a very busy guy. He's uber, like Bill, no doubt, in Northern Indiana. He's uber connected around town. He's in this networking thing and that networking thing. And we've run into each other and we've got to know each other. And he gets curious about this peer group experience. And he eventually comes to his first meeting, spends all day with us. In those days, our meetings are half a day, as you heard Mark say, so they're even more time and money efficient. But Mark spends all day with us. And then the following day, he leaves me a voicemail. And the voicemail goes something like this: I think I've made a terrible mistake. I don't think I have time for this. Because obviously he got back to his inbox the following morning and it's overflowing with emails. And so I left him a voicemail. I wasn't able to get him real time. I left him a voicemail and I said, Mark, I just want you to think about whether being a member of this peer group is part of your time management problem or your time management solution. Trust me, if you'll come on in, you will discover progressively that it is a beautiful part of your time management solution, the 2% or 3% of your time, as Mark just said, that a half day represents per month, will help the other 97, 98% of your time be so much more focused, productive, and courageous and confident. And very soon you will feel the net benefit going forwards. And lo and behold, as you heard, Mark was in that group from that, those two voicemails. 12 years later, Mark is still in that group until I discontinued doing that in 2018. And not only did Mark do that, he then went on to as he said, now run the San Diego franchise of Ref, because he's so committed to this peer group experience. I just had to tell that story again, Mark. I love telling that story. So there we have it, everybody. There's another episode of the Peering Podcast in the can, as it were. We have been blessed today to be able to tap into the insights, the experience, and the wisdom of two phenomenal leaders who've been doing financial executive forums for a decade or more. Bill McDonough in Northern Indiana, Mark Neilson in San Diego, Southern California. Thank you so much, Bill and Mark, for spending your time with us today. We'll have you back down the path. And everybody, hope you enjoyed that. Come on back next time to the next episode of the Peering Podcast. We'll see you then.